This is the first trip to Japan for a Chinese premier in 8 years. This year also marks the 40th anniversary of the signing of the China-Japan Treaty of Peace and Friendship. What are the hopes for Li Keqiang's visit to Japan? After the US withdrawal, Shinzo Abe has been trying hard to keep the TPP on track. And although Japan has not been on board China's Belt and Road Initiative, it recently said it intends to set up a Belt and Road official agreement. How is Japan's thinking being influenced by these recent events? During the trip, the 7th China-Japan ROK leaders meeting took place. In it, leaders of the three countries agreed to work together to get the DPRK to give up its nuclear weapons. With a summit between Trump and Kim said to be coming, what can the three countries do to help the process? Some say Trump's America First policy is helping to promote the process of Asian integration. And with renunciation of the Iran nuclear deal, the world is more wary of inconsistency in US policy. What will be the consequences for East Asia?
It is a nice breaking visit to Japan by Premier Li Keqiang since bilateral ties declined sharply 8 years ago. The Chinese premier met with his Japanese counterpart, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, in Tokyo on Wednesday. The two leaders also joined ROK President Moon Jae-in for a meeting in which the three sides spoke about regional free trade agreements and the prospects for denuclearization. To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the studio by Professor Hyung-Lee Lee from the University of International Business and Economics and Rick Dunham, a visiting scholar at Tsinghua University. We shall also speak via satellite to Professor Takasato Watanabe at Deutsche University and in Tokyo. He's in Tokyo. And CGTN correspondent Shin Han in Seoul. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Well, you know, a story went viral these days about why Premier Li Keqiang refused to put on a smile when he was shaking with his Japanese counterpart. And that reminded us of an occasion when Shinzo Abe came over to attend yet another multilateral occasion, a meeting. President Xi Jinping refused to put on a smile. It was a frosty handshake. So what do you think of this vivid illustration of the frosty tie?
I don't think that this was a frosty overall situation, but I think that the Chinese are not ready to smile yet. I mean, they want results. I mean, I think right now you have a situation where you have possible breakthroughs, where it's really more thawing of the ice, but it's not yet the point where we have with North Korea, where you could see President Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un smiling on the beach in Dalian.
Professor Shun, don't you think the two leaders, Premier Li Keqiang and the Prime Minister Abe, each kept in mind the domestic audience respectively? For example, the rise of nationalist sentiments over the issue of Diaoyu Islands in the case of Premier Li Keqiang. So he could not afford to put on a broad smile to give a wrong impression, well, this is indeed a major breakthrough, because it takes time, doesn't it?
Frankly speaking, although both of the two countries have the joint will to improve the bilateral relations, there are still many disputes, many challenges in front of the two countries. That means the territorial dispute, the nationalism in both of the two countries. All these problems cannot find satisfying solution in a very short time. So we must be aware of that. Dispute will always be there. However, let's have a new starting point. That may be most important.
Let me go to Professor Takasato Watanabe. What was the immediate response from the Japanese media towards this summit meeting? A pretty rare one if you look at the dramatic decline in our bilateral relationship since the alleged purchase of Diaoyu Islands quite a few years ago.
All the media in Japan are very happy to find the three leaders summit in Japan this time. However, some the analysts and also some people's organizations say that economically this is good, and also for the world peace it is good. However, as far as Japan is going only hand in hand with the United States, forgetting the historical past against the Korean peoples, I mean two Koreas now, and also Chinese. Like Mr. Abe, he forgot anything about the Nanjing massacre. He denies in the textbooks. So these are the deep analysis of the intelligent people, citizens group, and also more than half of the people. So you see the supporting rate of Mr. Abe is getting lower and lower. And also even the former two prime ministers like Mr. Koizumi and also Mr. Fukuda, they say that Mr. Abe cannot even run for as the candidate for the next term of the prime minister. So this is very serious inside Japan. But the media is now celebrating three, you see, heads of the meeting of the countries, South Korea, China, and Japan, especially when they see we have the Prime Minister Li in Tokyo and also in Hokkaido today. The people are happy on the first stage, but the analytical reports of the media are very serious.
And the Premier Li Keqiang was received by the Japanese Emperor. What does that mean in terms of diplomatic protocol, or do you think this symbolizes a rise in the importance of this bilateral relationship? Was it a deliberate arrangement by the Shinzo Abe administration?
Yeah. Mr. Abe wants to get his, you see, supporting rate up and up, but it is very difficult and hopeless. So he arranged the meeting with the Prime Minister for Prime Minister Li and for Emperor. But you see, this is giving a good impression to the people of Japan. Also, I think, or I want to have the good impression from Chinese people. But actually, you see, this is a performance on the stage for Mr. Abe. So this is good, really good. I support it, but actually, you see, political show for the, you see, Mr. Abe's administration.
Yes, indeed. The symbolic message about the importance of the bilateral relationship has been received very quickly and efficiently by the audience in China. Let me cross over to Shen, our CGTN correspondent in Seoul. Hello. Now, this summit, you can call it somehow a summit between the three countries that took place against the backdrop of very dramatic improvement of the inter-Korean relationship following the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, as well as Mr. Kim Jong-un's two visits to the People's Republic of China. Now, it seems that the Japanese government has been embarrassed and marginalized, so to speak, by the ice-breaking relationship, improvement between the two Koreas, and particularly with the proactive diplomacy of Mr. Xi Jinping. Don't you think Mr. Abe has been brought to the edge of the seat? What do you think of his current mindset?
Well, I think from South Korean President Moon Jae-in's perspective, it's brilliant to have this trilateral meeting in terms of the timing coming off the heels, of course, this inter-Korean summit back on April 27th. There were also concerns that maybe China was being bypassed in the overall situations here on the Korean Peninsula, but having DPRK leader Kim Jong-un visit not just Beijing, but of course Dalian recently put to rest any of those worries. So to get Japan into this, of course, being a regional player in the overall situation on the Korean Peninsula, we saw Prime Minister Abe travel to to the U.S. And meet with U.S. President Donald Trump recently as well, where he brought up issues like the issue of Japanese abductees. So as far as what President Moon is doing in terms of diplomacy, to have this day trip to Japan to attend this meeting with the leaders of China and Japan was a brilliant move, according to what many analysts here. But it was largely overshadowed because of the denuclearization issue. And much like Premier Li's first visit to Japan in 8 years, it was the first time in more than 6 years that a South Korean president visited Tokyo, taking into account bilateral relations between Seoul and Japan.
Well, Japan seems not to have much of a say on the issue of denuclearization, despite the history of six-party talks that also involved Tokyo. Let me go back to the issue of abductees. Three Korean American abductees have been released by Mr. Kim Jong-un as a friendly gesture to lay the groundwork before the upcoming summit, which is said to be taking place in Singapore, but it's one of the strong options in terms of location. But what do you think of, say, the possibility, Mr. Watanabe, for the remaining Japanese hostages to be released in the near future?
I hope that, you see, those hostages should be returned if they are living. This is serious matter for the people of Japan. However, Mr. Trump, you see, he is concerned with only Americans. And Mr. Abe says that he has the 100% the same idea with the, Mr. Trump's. But Mr. Trump's, you see, attention is toward China, North Korea, and then South Korea, not Japan itself, because he believes that Mr. Abe follows 100% Mr. Trump. For the people of Japan, the abduction is very important, psychologically. However, I don't think that we may have the bigger possibility to have them return to Japan. But I hope it should be, you see, happening in the very near future.
Professor Chung, let's look at the driving force behind the remarkable improvement, which is yet to take place between Japan and China, the second and the third biggest economies. Prime Minister Abe went to the Chinese embassy in Tokyo to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the signing of the Treaty of Peace and Friendship. That's an important occasion for politicians on both sides to meet and upgrade the relationship. But what do you think of the other factors, such as Shinzo Abe went to Washington 5 times, and it seems most of the time he was given a cold shoulder by President Trump, particularly in the absence of TPP. Now, what do you think of that part of the driving force?
In fact,
in other words, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe wants to take over the initiative and the leadership of TPP during the absence of the Trump administration, and also use China as a bargaining chip to balance its awkward relationship with Washington, because President Trump is known for his unpredictability and very difficult to handle.
In fact, in my opinion, the TPP and RCEP, or China, Japan, Korea FTA, there should not be predestined contradiction between all these trade agreements. All these trade agreements can enjoy some degree of coexistence. That means to some country, yeah, they can have their free choice of any different FTA, and each FTA should not be enemy or adversary of another FTA. And in the same line, along the same line, the U.S.-Japan relations should not be contradictory to China-Japan relations. And both of the two countries are very important to Japan. Maybe in Prime Minister Abe's eyes, maybe United States may be more important than China. But China cannot be ignored, can never be ignored. So that can explain Mr. Abe's thinking.
Rick, a former Japanese Prime Minister and the former chairman of Democratic Party of Japan, Mr. Hokio Hatuyama, was kicked out of his office by the Americans since he called for oust of American troops from Okinawa. And he also called for having a single Asian dollar as part of the regional integration at the cost of American stakes in this region. This time around, it seems Prime Minister Shinzo Abe also buys this idea of having kind of a regional bloc or FTA between the 3 major economies. The United States may not be very happy to see this process. What do you think?
I think that we are at 2 pivot points. One is Shinzo Abe as far as Korea is concerned, because he is at a risk of being isolated and being out of the decision making on that. The second is economic, and that's what you were talking about, and that's one where Japan can move in and become much more important, and it's pivoting away from the concept of Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was conceived as an idea but Japan, Australia, the United States to compete with China. If he can pivot away to a free trade agreement with Korea and China and a regional trade agreement in the Asia-Pacific area, it's the United States that's isolated, and it could be all of East Asia that gains. But Shinzo Abe has his political problems at home, domestic political problems, and reaching an economic agreement, reaching any trade agreement is very, very hard. China's a tough negotiator. Japan's a tough negotiator. South Korea is in all bilateral, multilateral agreements. So I think just the concept that the three are interested in negotiating is good, but I think we're a long way from the concept to reality.
Hello, Professor Watanabe. The Japanese government still refuses to join the AIIB, given the fact that they are the principal shareholder of ADB, the Asia Development Bank. But many Japanese entrepreneurs start to show serious interest in the idea of a Belt and Road Initiative, and yet Prime Minister Shinzo Abe didn't show up and attend the BRI summit meeting that President Xi Jinping hosted last year. What's the latest progress? Do you think that we're going to have any chance for the Japanese government to be part of a BRI, I mean Belt and Road Initiative, so long as the issue of transparency and the rule of law could be addressed properly from the Japanese perspective?
Mr. Abe always says through the telephone talks and also visiting to the United States, he is always with Mr. Trump's idea. However, in Asian areas, TPP or FTA, you see, these are very simple ideas for the Asian nations. However, to be consistent with the American idea, it is very difficult. Japan side want to have the investment from China and also cooperation with South Korea. However, you see, these three heads summit shows actually these are 5 heads summit. I mean, behind, you see, the 3 heads, we have Mr. Trump and also Mr. Kim Jong-un. So if the prosperity of economy among those 5 countries cordially, I think this produces the best idea. And also, Japan want to support, I mean, Japanese people want to support Belt and Road, you see, initiative of China, because, you see, Japan belongs to the Asian side. And also Japan and China, South Korea, North Korea, also, of course, United States can join if he wants. The Belt and Road initiative and project is the best for co-economic development.
Thank you so much, Professor Watanabe. You are watching Dialogue with Rick Dunham, Professor Xingri Li, and our Japanese Professor Watanabe, as well as our CGTN correspondent Shin Ham, who's standing by in Seoul. Our discussion focuses on remarkable improvement in one of the most important bilateral relationships in this region, the one between Tokyo and Beijing since the alleged purchase of Diaoyu Islands a few years early. Now, it seems a breakthrough is most likely to take place. We'll be back in a short while. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Hi, Shen. Given the memories about Japanese colonialism, and particularly the issue of comfort women, it's a bleeding wound for most of the Koreans on the peninsula. What do you think of the prospect of having these 2 countries, Japan and South Korea, going or coming closer pretty soon?
Well, President Moon has made it clear what his position is, specifically with the comfort women issue. We know that the past administration under President Park Geun-hye had made a deal back at the end of 2015 to put this comfort women issue to rest, a quote, final and irreversible deal. But of course, the Moon Jae-in administration, when it came in to power, looked back on this deal and set up a task force and concluded that, of course, this deal was not made with the Korean people in mind, but it did not decided not to renegotiate the deal because what we know is what South Korea wants to do is to continue with this future-oriented relationship with Tokyo, but of course keeping in mind these historical and territorial issues that still remain outstanding with Japan. So you can't ignore the fact that Japan and South Korea, especially economically, have great potential, and I think with Moon Jae-in's visit to Tokyo this week is a sign that he's willing to work with Japan, but there's a limit to what many scholars will say because of the historical and territorial issues that still remain outstanding.
Shane, tell us briefly how Koreans look at the issue of a further regional economic integration between these three major economies, since South Korea has signed FTA with the PRC, and Abe has every reason to feel jealous. Given the current dynamics of the trilateral summit meeting in Tokyo, what do you think of the momentum of including Japan for this process?
Well, I think it's hard not to answer that question without mentioning everything, the dynamics here in Northeast Asia, so to speak. A free trade agreement with China makes sense because China is, of course, South Korea's #1 trading partner. South Korea is a country that is heavily dependent on exports and bilateral trade. You see the country has had free trade deals not just with China, but the United States, the European Union. It all began in the 1990s with a free trade deal with Chile, but a potential free trade deal, whether it be in the framework of a bilateral deal with Tokyo or a trilateral one, which includes Beijing as well, it really digs deep into the hearts of many Koreans, and I think that's why you ask that, and there's more involved in that because South Korean industries often compete directly with many Japanese companies, so there obviously need to be more discussed moving forward with any potential trilateral deal with Tokyo and China. But like I said, economically moving forward, it's not out of the picture.
Thank you so much, Shane, for being with us. Welcome back. Professor Shun, do you think China and Japan are ready to sign an agreement on establishing a hotline to avoid having military confrontation in an emergency case?
In fact, if the two countries can sign this kind of agreement to avoid a potential military conflict, it can be beneficial for both of the two countries. As we all know, the territorial disputes between the two countries is in fact rather complicated, and it's very hard for both of the two countries to find a satisfying solution for both of the two countries in a short time. So, first of all, maybe we should have the territorial disputes frozen. And how can we have it frozen? To try our best to avoid military conflict may be most important. And then on this foundation of sustainable peace, we can have enough time to find some final solution. That may be a good idea. Yeah.
Here are a couple of issues for Professor Watanabe to take a closer look. Now, with the rapid military build-up of the PLA Blue Water Navy, do you think the Japanese have grown a sense of increasing uneasiness? What do you think of the impact of China's military modernization?
In Japan, government is very afraid of the strong military power of China. However, the people want to have good relations with the Chinese people. As you know very well, you see, one state is composed of three, at least, the components: government and people, and also the state power. If, you see, Chinese people and Japanese people have the common understanding of the historical past, this is the foundation of the peace between the two countries. But in addition to that, the accidental, you see, attack or a defense sometimes might occur. So the permanent system of talks between the two, when the accidental, you see, danger takes place, this is very important between China, Japan, also with South Korea. But when it comes to the North Korean matter, this is more, you see, dangerous. if the United States
we understand
and
the implications of the geopolitical dangers. Professor Watanabe, Taiwan Travel Act has been signed and approved by the Senate and the House as well as the White House. And next month, the American Institute or Office of American Government in Taipei will be relocated, and the new building will be completed. A big ceremony will be held, and the senior government official is likely to be sent to Taipei from Washington. Now, for years, we know that the Japanese authorities made it very clear that the U.S.-Japan Security Pact covers nearby waters, including the island of Taiwan. Of course, the Chinese government is not very happy because we have our own anti-secession law. We are vehemently opposed to the efforts by the pro-secession forces like the DPP in Taipei to get rid of the Chinese influence and to seriously undermine the Chinese ethnicity in many, many ways since the years of Chen Shui-bian. So in this extreme case of having the growing presence of American military in Taipei, do you think the Japan-US Security Pact will go into effect immediately and military escalations will take place no matter what?
40 years ago, Japan and China concluded the Peace and Friendship Treaty. It says that Japan admits only mainland China, I mean People's Democratic of China, you see. So this is a solution. But if there's something, you see, happens around Taipei, United States have the possibility to say some strong words against China. Of course. But actually, you see, United States, I believe, doesn't send any military forces because they know how to have the peaceful order in Asia, of this particular area.
Thank you so much. Rick, very quickly, what do you think should be the most likely scenario or the worst case scenario? Should Japan join hands with the United States in defending Taiwan, according to the U.S.-Japan Security Pact?
Well, the worst case scenario is Japanese troops are in war alongside American fighting on Taiwan against PLA troops. That's the worst case scenario. I think it's highly unlikely, but I think that there are hardliners in the Trump administration who want to send signals to Beijing not even to think about it right now. The rhetoric has been ratcheted up on both sides, and I think that the hardliners headed by John Bolton are rhetorically
Thank you so much. That's the end of this edition of Dialogue on an improvement of the bilateral ties between Tokyo and Beijing. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.